Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson. And today we have a very special episode, and I'm going to start off by singing Happy Birthday to you. Okay, that's as far as I'm going because you don't want to hear me sing. But Dr. Emma is here, and we're celebrating her birthday today because it is her birthday.
You.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be 41. No, it is exciting. Chiefly because my birthday is at the end of May, and it's always a good time to have a birthday. I'm a like a spring, summer kind of person.
Yeah.
I think people have noticed with all my negativity during the winter time about the weather. So we had a nice streak of beautiful weather here. Mm-hmm. Now some rain, and that doesn't bother me too much. I don't mind the rain. So yeah, it's a good time to have a birthday. The number, it's like kind of odd. 41 is not my favorite.
Well, you can say whatever age you want now. Now that you're in your 40s, you can tell people you're 35.
Okay.
It's
I'm
like
49.
No, that's not the direction that most people go.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Then people are going to be like, oh, you look so good. I'm like, yeah, I know. I don't look a day over 48.
Right. See, nowadays when somebody says, oh, you look like you're in your 30s, are you? I go, yes, I am.
Yeah.
They don't need to know.
In my brain, definitely. Yeah. No, I don't, each time has its things. I'm enjoying this time of life. So
good.
It's a good thing to have, and especially, to be able to celebrate good weather, nice food. It's always a good excuse to celebrate a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm so excited because we had a birthday episode for you last year on your 40th too. So this is a tradition now.
I think we just make it a lot about me. I don't know.
I'm okay.
I thought it was about the Tudors here, but never mind.
This show is just about Dr. Emma. No, I'm just kidding. Not today.
I love it. That's why I listen to it all the time.
Well, today we're talking about somebody else who loves to hear about himself.
Exactly. That's why we connect so well. Actually, we don't share the birth month because he was born in June. But his birthday is coming up. He's from late June. If you want to say who it is.
Well, what we call him the Tool on the show. Tool. If anybody who's listened for any length of time knows that, they know we're talking about Henry VIII, aren't we? Mm-hmm. He was the tool of tools.
He did have several names, as these people always do, because he was, he wasn't always King of England. He was, he was known as Harry too, not just Henry. Maybe, I'm sure most people know this, but Harry's actually short for Henry, but it's not shorter. That's what I was never understood about that.
I don't get that either.
And it's a name that it's been used by kings of England and for a long time, because he was the 8th, right? That means there was 7 other dudes named Henry that made it to the throne before him, starting with his father, right?
Yeah.
Who is really the founder of the Tudors dynasty. So, yeah.
Well, and today I think what we really want to talk about is Henry's relationship with the women in his life and how they influenced him, right?
You're going to talk about women? Wait,
well,
we've never done that. That's a new thing for us. Talking about women. Everybody getting excited. We're finally going to talk about Henry VIII, and now we're back to the women.
Well, they're the
You
interesting.
thought we were just going to talk about this guy we kind of hate. But no.
We love to hate him, right? I think that, and this is why
he is yes.
Yeah.
He's a good character to love, hate, yes.
Yeah, this is why the Tudors are as popular as they are, is because of the chaotic reign of the tool, Henry VIII.
Yes. And the superb way in which the artist rendered him and the court. And we can almost talk to them when we go to Madrid and we go to the Thyssen-Bornemisza Museum. And you can see the only Holbein picture of Henry VIII that survives that was painted at Vivum, so during his lifetime. And by the way, he's they're displaying this portrait next to the portrait of Catherine of Aragon. The portrait of Juan de Flandes, where she holds a little bud of a rose, a red
Yeah.
rose. And every time I walk into that room, I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm happy about this display. Because I don't know if they were married. It's just weird to see her as a young kid and him as a mature man.
Hmm.
Not in the time they ever coincided, right? So, but there he is, and that's a superb picture. If you ever go to that museum and stand in front of, it looks like Henry's about to talk to you, and
Which
he's thinking something.
which one is it? Can you describe it?
Yes, it's a picture of Henry in the Museo Thyssen-Bornemisza in front of the Prado Museum, so in front of the Prado Museum where his daughter by Antonis More, Mary, is. It's a picture by Holbein. It's got a blue background, very similar to the pictures that he drew and he painted then of his wives, like Anne of Cleves, that's in the Louvre, and the one of Jane Seymour that's in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. So it is really the only picture of Henry VIII painted by Holbein that survives to this day.
Oh,
And it's in Madrid.
of course it is.
Isn't that a big slap in Henry's face?
It really is.
That the only surviving picture by his favorite artist. It's in Madrid.
Henry VIII is just rolling over in his
Irony.
grave, isn't he?
Well, it's ironic, but it's also it just speaks to the close knit relationship that because of this marriage between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and then Mary, Tudor, and Philip of Spain, even though then Spain and England ended up being rivals for that time, they were so interlinked. And all these artworks were traveling. And so, I mean, it's no surprise to me that, for example, the portrait of Mary's in the Prado, because it was commissioned by the people in Spain, Charles V, Mary of Hungary. So that's the reason why we have the two best portraits of Tudor monarchs in Spain.
That's amazing.
That's a big statement.
It's a huge statement. So if you're in Spain, make sure you go see these.
Make sure you send me an email if you don't agree and tell me why.
Oh my gosh.
No, really, I want to start a debate on this because probably other people will think there's portraits of Elizabeth the First that are better. I don't think so, but I would like to talk about it. I'm very interested in portraiture, you know that. So but I'm thinking about this quite a lot. Both of those pictures, the Holbein, the Henry VIII Holbein is in Madrid, and also is Antonis More portrait of Mary. They've never been together, I think. They've never been displayed together. Maybe we should.
I think
send a proposal.
You know people there, right?
I can write in Spanish.
Wait, what?
Maybe. Who knows?
Who knows?
Watch the space.
Okay, so we are talking about the ladies, the women in Henry VIII's life who influenced him. But in order to get this topic going, I think we have to start with his father, Henry VII. And
That's
we
right.
know of one woman in particular who really influenced his life and I believe some of his choices too. Who would that be?
Well, chiefly his mother, right?
Yes.
I think, when you were saying that, and I thought about this when I was preparing for this episode, I think we're going to learn a lot more about how his wife also influenced him a lot.
No.
Elizabeth of York is a very underrated figure, but she's crucial. She was what you can call the Isabella of Castile of England, because she was really the heir, the legitimate heir, right? She was the daughter of who had been the King of England. So I think that there's going to be a lot more work on Elizabeth, but you're right. I think Margaret was a powerhouse, not just in politics, but also in culture. She was an amazing patron of the humanities. She founded three colleges, if I'm not mistaken, which were built during the time of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. So Catherine of Aragon takes up that legacy of Margaret, Beaufort, depends, if you pronounce it in French, English. And those projects that she started, the cultural ones, were continued by Catherine and the people who were in charge of carrying out Margaret's will. So her executors, right? These were people linked to Catherine of Aragon because one of them was John Fisher, who ended up in the trial defending Catherine, right?
Yeah,
So Catherine, like the women in Henry's life are very interlinked. That's what I wanted to say. In the will of Margaret Beaufort, there's things that she leaves exactly to Catherine because Catherine of Aragon is already queen when she dies. She dies shortly after her son dies, right?
that's
After
right.
Henry VII dies. Probably brokenhearted, right? Because she had had him at 13.
Yeah, 13.
Gee, that is just a thought that's something that I think we get very insensitive to when we are in this 21st century. We realize these women are starting to have babies, sometimes as early as 13 years old, 12 years old. It's incredible. So they were bound together. They weren't that, the age gap wasn't that big between Henry and his mom.
I
I
can't
think
even
she's a
imagine.
powerhouse. What do you think about Margaret?
Oh, I think she was like the secret weapon of Henry VII's life and rule. Like
Mm-hmm.
she had been
Mm-hmm.
around for so long and seen so many things that while he was outside of the country, she was living in England, experiencing the Wars of the Roses and
That's true.
seeing what was happening to her family and all of those people around her. I think she was really
Yeah.
intelligent too.
Yes. And I think the self-esteem that she had from knowing she was the one giving him the legitimacy,
Hmm.
right? I think that's very important. I think that is very important to remember that it was Margaret who was giving him the right to the throne of England, really.
Right?
And that Henry is really just a secondary figure in the Lancastrian side, thanks to Margaret. So I think that's why they had that relationship too, because he knew his power came from her too,
Right.
So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
his father's, you know, background. I mean, his father, Edmund Tudor, was
Hmm.
the child of Catherine of Valois, who was a French princess.
Yeah,
And so I
exactly.
think a lot of times people look at it and they go, well, he was the child of a French princess. Well, she wasn't
Hmm.
English, was she?
Do you know that Margaret actually translated from French into English? She knew French. She
Oh,
didn't know Latin as well as
really?
Catherine would know and introduce in the court, but she was definitely a very cultivated woman too in what was more the traditional medieval culture in England, where the high-born women would know, if they were lucky, something like French because they had these French connections like Margaret did. So definitely think about that, and also the fact that her son had to go to the continent and live there for some time. I think they were very continental in a way, Margaret and Henry VII, because Henry had to live abroad for years, right? I
Yeah.
think that's why the Tudors dynasty it's such a European dynasty, really, if you think about it. And Henry VIII embodies that because he wants to be in Europe so bad and so desperately, and
Yeah.
he's so happy to have a Spanish wife at the beginning, right?
Hmm.
Most powerful ally that his dad has provided for him. So I think it starts with Margaret and her open mindset and her self-esteem as a woman who is given the right to the throne to her son, right?
Yeah.
No small feat.
I always wonder how much influence Margaret really had. Like, did Henry just do whatever she told him to do, or did he put his foot down?
I don't think that was the case. I think when you are a mother, you have to use the art of persuasion, and you don't always get your own way. Um, yeah, and Henry VII was, I from what the choices he made sometimes and the way he carried out himself and did things, I think he valued his mom, and he probably wouldn't have never contradicted her in person, but I think he was the king, and he felt he was the rightful king because he had won it in battle, and at that time that was, ordained by God because
Yeah.
they believed in those things. So, but he probably had a very good relationship with her. So I think sometimes we tend to forget not everybody has conflict with each other at this time, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And probably Margaret also thought, well, if my son decides he's the king, they believed in those things, that it worked like that. Did they have fights like every mother and son? Of course.
No doubt.
Yeah, like you have friction with someone you live in, or I'm sure that once Henry was married and she decided who he was going to marry and he went with it, there was friction with Elizabeth too at some point, I'm sure. We do know by accounts, and I have a little fact about this that I thought was really interesting. When Pedro de Ayala, so a Spanish envoy, was there in 1498, so Henry VIII is already a boy.
Mm-hmm.
He's already been in the age that he's instructed in his formal education. Pedro de Ayala says that Henry VII was much influenced by his mother and his followers in affairs of or personal interests and in others. That's what the Spanish envoy is saying in 1498. So
Henry VII is influenced by his mother and others.
And so I think she just belonged to a faction in court too. That's also what I'm saying. And I think that Henry VII was someone, he had lots of contestants, people saying they were the rightful heirs too. So his mother must have been the pillar of his life in that sense. And she, on the other hand, needed to protect that son above everything. And then her grandson, Henry, because she lives on until Henry VIII becomes king and his grandmother dies. But
Not long after.
no.
Yeah. Do you think that Margaret Beaufort's influence on her son, Henry VII, had some type of influence on her grandson, Henry VIII, seeing that growing up?
Yes, I think they were people. I think Henry VIII had a very similar life to Catherine of Aragon. He grew up in a court where everything was okay, but it hadn't been okay 5 minutes before, right? So I think the previous generation, I come from, for example, in Spain, our grandparents went through a civil war. So my grandmother had a very stern mindset about how, you have to be, first of all, grateful in life for having a good life, but then ready for anything because anything could happen, right? And I think that was the mindset that Isabel of Castile and Fernando of Aragon had, and also Henry VII and his mother, because she hadn't fought the battles, but she had been behind him, and if he had fallen, she would have been kidnapped, killed, something, right? So those things I think unite and they do influence. So I think probably Henry VIII grew up with a mindset that was a glorious past, what his father and grandmother had done.
Yeah.
But it was a very different time for him because he was being brought up in a Renaissance court, just like Catherine. Probably with a lot of talk about what had just happened too. So yeah, I'm sure his grandmother and women were largely in charge of the education of children. And Elizabeth of York, Henry's mother, dies shortly after giving birth in 1503. So we all know that a lot of scholars have pointed out that this deeply influenced Henry too, right? Because he became an orphan.
Yeah. I mean, and he spent so much time with his mother and sisters.
Exactly. There's a manuscript. I don't know if you know about this. There's a manuscript in the I think it's called the National Museum of Wales. Maybe this is a slightly different name I'm giving it, but there's a manuscript there that belonged to one of the Guildford women, in which there are illuminations and believed to be a depiction of Henry crying when he's a little boy. And the argument is that he was crying over the death of his mother.
Yes.
These were very tragical things. Think about this. He's super happy. He's 10 years old when Arthur and Catherine are married in 1501. The Chronicle says that he was the center of attention there. He was 10 years old. He took off his jacket. He was dancing, blah, blah, blah. Everything was happy times. 4 months later, his brother is dead. And Catherine almost dies from this. Okay? This is April of 1502. His mom is still a youngish woman who's pregnant. And she dies the following, not even so, and the baby she's had dies. Imagine what is that at a crucial age for a boy at 11 years old to 10 years old to go from the happiest you've ever been to being an orphan with a dad who is probably increasingly going a bit crazy over the fact that, what am I going to do now with one heir?
Yes.
Anything could happen. And then the idea is that he basically becomes a prisoner of his dad, doesn't he?
Yeah, he definitely does. All of those things that you just said happened definitely affected Henry VIII's life
Imagine that.
when he became king. I'm always fascinated by his relationship with his mother and how it seems like he was trying to repeat that with his wives.
Exactly. And when I say that Elizabeth of York is a very understated queen, I mean that. There is evidence that she was behind the remodeling of Greenwich Palace, and she was the one to provide plans for the new building to the architect. This is incredible. This is only done at this time, the turn of the 15th century into the 16th century. This is only done by women in places like Italy or Spain, like Isabel of Castile. I think there was a mutual influence between Isabel of Castile and Elizabeth of York. They called themselves cousins. Elizabeth of York wrote to Isabel on many occasions and saying things like, I hope Catherine can learn French with Margaret of Austria because no one here speaks Spanish or Latin. Very important to know, because then a generation later, the women are all speaking Latin. The daughters of Thomas More, Mary Tudor, Elizabeth the First of England. And there's a lot of influence between these two women because they knew, well, they shared a name. They were named the same, right? Isabel, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And then they were princesses from birth. They had that same self-esteem that Margaret had, even bigger. They were princesses. I think Elizabeth of York was a huge influence on Henry, on Arthur, and on Catherine of Aragon. And Catherine takes on her role, like she takes on Margaret Beaufort's role, and she tries to emulate them because they had been great women. And I think Henry values that so much. Catherine helps Henry to recruit Pietro Torrigiano, the famous, hot-tempered Italian. Who can blame the guy, who doesn't like to get in a little fight and break Michelangelo's nose? But they definitely recruited him from the court of Margaret of Austria to carve the tomb of Margaret. Imagine how much they valued her, that they wanted her to have the same tomb as the founders, Elizabeth and Henry VII, and to all be displayed together in the Lady Chapel in Westminster Abbey. That is a huge deal. That means that just those first three tombs, it's two women and one man.
Yes. And if you haven't seen these tombs in person, it is different. It is definitely different than seeing pictures of them, because when you see them in person, you can see all of the details that go into making something so beautiful.
It's very difficult to get images. It's something that it is a bucket list item that you have to put. I mean, Westminster Abbey, everybody has to go there once in their lifetime. Come on. It's a must. It's a must. We'll go there together one time, Rebecca.
I would like that, because when I went there, it was in June and it was so busy, and it was just standing in line, rotating around these tombs and trying not to take too much time because there's so many people waiting. It's just like snapping quick photos. So I really feel like I didn't get a chance to fully appreciate the tombs at Westminster, including those.
I'm going to say something you might not like. June, May, October, November, March. It's always busy in there.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's such an iconic place. London is such a everybody wants to go there. Everybody wants to. I mean, I feel it. I don't know if I'm getting older or it's just busier and busier every time I go. But that area is definitely high volume of people. So you do have to be ready. Maybe if you think about the times that people are having lunch breaks, things. If you don't want to. It's just sometimes it's stressful, because there's a lot of people. And I felt a couple of times like that around that area in London. Like you can't stay too long, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I don't like that feeling. I made
myself stay last time. I felt like that. I was like, no, this is just a feeling because everybody's like hectic and walking around and just being frantic. Just sit down. I took a little soda with me and I was like, I'm just going to sit down and let this rush just stop. And it did. After 10 minutes, I sat there for like an hour. And then I enjoyed it very much because I do feel rushed sometimes in London. I don't like that feeling. I like to enjoy London. It's such a cool
right. Well, you stand in a queue for like 30, 45 minutes.
We're not selling this very well, Rebecca.
It's worth it, though.
Come
it's
to our tour while you just wait forever.
It's so worth it, though. Even as long as I stood in that line to get into Westminster Abbey, and it was like 2:00 in the afternoon, it was so worth it.
I know, you always meet people. There's a lot of Americans, so you'll always meet someone from a different state if you're American.
Yeah.
But there's always people from everywhere. And everybody's so excited to be there. That's the cool
Yes.
part of it too, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, imagine that in 50, and all the people that have been crowned there and have been married there and have been, for example, Catherine wasn't married there. She was married in St. Paul's to Arthur, but she was crowned there in June of 1509 with Henry, even though Henry years later had one of the Hornboots do a miniature of his coronation, kicking out Catherine and just being him. They were both crowned together. Well, think about that. Think about the time when Anne Boleyn was queen. You couldn't have an image of Catherine and Henry being crowned because imagine how weird it must have been for an English subject. And this is another woman that influenced Henry, so we can talk a bit about her, Anne Boleyn, obviously. Imagine how weird it must have been for someone born, you know, the same age as Catherine and Henry, more or less, right? Born in the 1480s or 90s, to have known a crowned queen, to have gone to her coronation, and then is like 1534.
Yeah.
Three? Sorry. 33, 34 is her first reign. Yes, the first year of her reign. And June, and be like, we have a new coronation. Well, the other lady, queen, is still there and somewhere, isn't she? Well, yeah, but that was all a hoax.
Yeah, right. We're just going to pretend like that didn't happen. Brush that
Yeah,
under
it
the
never
rug.
did, actually. Did it? No.
Yeah, right. Right.
Bring the illuminators. We're going to make some changes to some documents. Come over here.
Well, I want to talk about Catherine of Aragon, and I know you're not going to argue to talk about her, but I think of all of his wives, she had the greatest influence on him.
Yes, and that's not debatable just because they had the longest relationship. She was older than him, and she just had I wouldn't say a better position in court when Arthur dies, because he's the Prince of Wales, but she becomes a diplomat. She has an official role, and he doesn't. And she develops this. So basically, when Henry VII dies, it's Catherine of Aragon who takes charge of everything. And I'm not saying that Henry didn't. I'm just saying that he needed that help. And it was good he had someone like that. And he was smart to rely on her. And she was smart to like put him up in a pedestal.
Yeah.
It didn't work out every single time. There's a very funny story about several funny stories with Fernando of Aragon, who was an old cranky man at this point and a very powerful king who had been doing conquests left and right, and Granada, he's just the coolest dude ever. And Henry VIII writes him a letter. He's so excited. I love you, father. And he calls him father, And Fernando writes to Catherine, and he's like, your husband's a bit annoying. I'd rather just write to you because you much better. I don't need it. No, thank you. And Catherine is like, okay, Dad, okay, just take it easy. Another time, when Ferdinand was known to be very cunning, right? And he inspired Machiavelli to write The Prince. He was that type of king. So he makes peace on one of these campaigns that he's doing without telling Henry. And when the envoys from Spain come, instead of going to Henry's palace, they go to Baynard's castle. That's Catherine's castle. And they are received there by the king's council in the queen's palace, where they had signed the agreement. And one of the things they tell the envoys from Spain is like, you can't treat the king like he's a boy. He's the king of England. Who do you think is sending that message? Henry? No, it's Catherine. Like, Dad, come on. We've talked about this. He's a man now. And he was, but he wasn't. You had to prove yourself. Henry wasn't an exception. Fernando wasn't doing an exception with Henry.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina ONE Live Clear today. Purina ONE, a difference from day one.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Yeah. Well, we have to remember, too, Henry VIII was not raised to be king.
No,
it was
and he was
last
18.
minute. Yeah.
And he was 18 when he became king. And yes, he was tall. Yes, he was handsome. Yes, he was educated. Yes, he knew he was going to be king for some time. But he wasn't prepared for the real kingship, which is go and fight wars and be able to come back from a lot of backstabbing, because that's what kings did. Every king was making agreements and breaking them left and right. So you had to be, he had to develop his tough skin that he developed with Catherine. And he lashed out on Catherine a lot sometimes. You father this, you father that. But the only way he got into Europe was with the help of Fernando and Catherine. And as soon as they're out of the picture and Wolsey's out of the picture and Cromwell kind of doesn't get things right, Henry's never relevant again in Europe. It's when the Trastámaras and the Habsburgs with Charles V too, basically giving him a shot at being someone in Europe. Oh, everybody's going to love me after this statement.
I think it's so true, though. I'm glad that you said that, because I guess I had never thought of it that way, how he
That's
became
all I
less...
think about, and how to convey that message to people in a loving and caring way, respectful manner, but saying it's true. It's true. Why are the Tudors known in France, in Italy, why they're famous? Because they were a European dynasty, not because they were, fighting, the people from Yorkshire to the people from Lancashire, right? No, it was because they were fighting in Europe. Because Henry VIII thought he could be emperor at one point.
Yeah, he did, indeed.
Sorry, but in this sense, I have to say I'm very Henry VIII. I grandiose dreams about, why not? I think that's why Henry and Catherine were a good tandem. She was the rock, the solid person that would be like, okay, Henry, let's take a second to think about this. Remember what happened last time you fought Francis?
Remember what happened? Yeah. Yeah, that was embarrassing, wasn't it?
That was embarrassing. You shouldn't grow a beard just because another guy has a beard, okay? That's called being a copycat. People kind of don't respect you when you do that, okay?
Yeah. He
Things
comes,
like
it's almost like he comes off a little bit immature, right?
Almost? Oh, you're so generous, Rebecca.
I'm
and that's why I
Minnesotan.
think that with Anne Boleyn, who I think maybe influenced Henry more than Catherine in many ways and respects, but they had an explosive relationship because they were very similar.
Yeah.
I think Anne Boleyn was very similar to Henry VIII in many ways.
Oh, well, I want to talk about her. We can go back and forth between the wives too, but now that you brought up Anne Boleyn, I want to know how you think she influenced Henry VIII.
I mean, this is something that maybe in England is viewed differently, but when you talk to people in Spain, the first thing when they say Henry VIII, oh yeah, he started a religion to marry Anne Boleyn.
Mm-hmm.
That's what people tell you. So how can that not be influenced? Like, to break with your religion, which was the most sacred thing people had back. I mean, I know it's the most sacred thing for a lot of people now, but back then, for everybody, the religion was the most important thing. And Henry was brought up, I think people might forget how Catholic Henry VII and Elizabeth of York and Margaret Beaufort were, and Henry VIII was. Yeah. And they say his daughter was so starving and so Catholic. No, she was normal. It had been the norm. Henry had made a point about being Catholic. He wrote things against Luther. That's not very far from his time,
Right.
Getting involved with Anne Boleyn. I don't know when they started their relationship. I think, maybe he did fight Francis because Anne Boleyn was there. Watching him. Wasn't she in Queen Claude's retinue? Because they say, she caught his eye when she returned to the court. Henry was in the continent in 1520.
Yeah. Well, the whole timeline of Anne Boleyn is always such a mystery. Like, we just don't know. And I feel like between you and me, neither of us are Anne Boleyn experts, but I do want to look at.
What?
I mean, if you had talked to me 15 years ago, I feel like I knew a lot more about her
I'm getting
then.
much better. She is mentioned, her sister's mentioned, and she's mentioned going to Margaret of Austria with Mary Tudor, Mary Rose Tudor, Henry VII's daughter, Henry VIII's sister. So she was the one to marry Charles V originally.
Yeah.
So if Catherine is sending the Boleyns to with Mary, it's because definitely they are people she thinks can become important in her court. And she wants them to learn the things that Margaret was the biggest power, Margaret of Austria. That's because we've been talking about Margaret, the other Margaret. Margaret of Austria, who was negotiating these marriages with Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon to marry Charles, future Charles V, to a Tudor princess, and sends Torrellano, sends the Horn Boots. She's the one to receive the Boleyns. And then they go to the court of Claude. Why? Because the alliance changes, right? Because Mary ends up marrying who? Louis XII of France. And he dies soon enough. And then she marries Henry Cavill. I mean,
you just wanted to talk about Henry Cavill.
Yeah,
I know,
let's talk a little bit about Henry Cavill. What is he up to these days?
Okay, anyway, Anne Boleyn, I just wanted to say I am curious what your thought is on how much of an influence you believe Anne had on getting the divorce or trying for the divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Was it really Anne, or were there other people around him influencing him and giving him these ideas?
Ooh. Well, I definitely don't think it was only Anne. And I definitely don't think she was even the main piece. And I think there was, when you study a court and you study several courts at the same time, you realize it's not about individuals. Not even Catherine had that power, or Henry. There was factions in courts, and factions in courts that had economic interests in these international alliances. So Anne Boleyn just represents a French faction, really, against a faction that had been mainstream with Catherine, which was the Spanish imperial faction, right? Charles V is not only Holy Roman Emperor, but he's the, he's the ruler of the Netherlands, and he's the King of Spain. So basically the main enemy of France. So in the Tudor court, which England is between all these places that we're talking about, positions, they're factions fighting for their place in court, for the king's favor. And I think the king is submitted to a lot of pressure. So, and I think Henry doesn't have that self-esteem or that mindset of knowing what he knows inside of him is right. So he is influenced a lot. So I think Anne Boleyn influenced him a lot for the divorce, but it was a lot of many other people that wanted to make her queen. Because imagine that. She's English, so she has a lot of people around her in England that wanted that position. And then she's not that powerful.
Yeah,
to be honest, she's not that powerful. And above all, if she gives a male heir to the king, then she's in.
Yes.
Like Margaret, and we've seen all the women who have boys become powerful queens. So imagine what it would have been like for the Boleyns, for Anne to have given birth to a son.
Yeah.
She would have been probably one of the greatest queens in England, known today, because it would have been the triumph of that idea. It just, she was like Catherine, she was unlucky, like most women in that time, and was unlucky. But I do think Henry and her worked very hard to sell her as the new queen, both of them. And I can say that for the first time this summer, they're going to be, two of their medals are going to be displayed together for the first time. So the only image that we have of Anne Boleyn, of her face, which is in a portrait medal, right? The most happy medal, will be in the exhibition that I will be curating this summer at the British Museum, focused on how women are making points about their power in the 15th and 16th century, appearing in these medals. And Henry is in another medal that was very likely made at the same time, and they're going to be displayed for the first time together. So,
Wow.
yes, and they're going to be medals of their children, because really of Elizabeth and of Mary, both Mary and Elizabeth use these images in this propaganda. And in the case of Anne Boleyn, what I've observed is she copies the models, the artists, and things that Catherine has done, because Catherine has been so successful. She was very smart in doing this. Was it Anne? Was it Henry? I think it was both of them. I think when you are, in a relationship with someone and you're in that sweet spot and you want to get married, and we know they remodeled Whitehall together. We know, but I think even though all of that happened, it must have been very hard for her, because Henry didn't get rid of everything. He had pictures of Isabel and Fernando. Imagine what it would be like for Anne Boleyn walking around Whitehall. Oh, there she is, the Spanish queen looking at me again.
Well, it wasn't just them that she had to deal with. She also had to deal with Henry's sisters, didn't she?
Exactly. And at least we know that Mary Rose, let's call her Mary Rose, married to Henry Cavill, in the show The Tudors, just for people who are like, what is she talking about?
Charles Brandon.
Charles Brandon, sorry. Sorry, Charles Brandon, Emma. Yeah, but she was against Anne Boleyn, and she showed it in court.
Yeah.
But she was quite cheeky, Mary Rose. She had married Charles Brandon behind her brother's back. So she was a very strong, opinionated woman. And her brother also, like, you see how Henry comes off of this alpha male that sometimes has like problems to like, or maybe not problems, or maybe he's better than we think, He did forgive his sister after, defying him and marrying Charles Brandon. So, he did have a little heart, and he probably, because of this influence of his mother, he did, he's always surrounded by women. That's what I'm saying. He's always listening to the women. Then after a while, he gets bored of them. I think this is his main problem. The main problem of Henry VIII is he gets bored of listening to the same person. And if you think of his life like that, you realize it's true, right?
Yeah. Some of them he listens to a little longer than others.
Who's the one that he listens to the longest?
Oh, well, probably the one he was married to the longest.
Do you think so, though? Because there was men in his life that definitely, but he didn't. Right? For example, his fallout with Fun Guy.
Yeah, Henry Guilford.
So Henry Guilford, Fun Guy, the guy who brings so many artists with like Holbein, right? He brings Holbein, and he works for him, and all these amazing Torriano and all these amazing artists that we've talking about. He has a fight with Anne Boleyn, and this is another thing about Henry, and I don't think, like every other person in this time, men didn't value women as their equals, right? So this dismissive attitude that Henry has towards his wife sometimes that is recorded is part of, Henry's not an exception. He just, I think, has a more, how do you call it? More visceral reaction to it. Charles V probably thought, what a silly thing this woman just said, but maybe didn't say it out loud. Right? Because decorum in the Spanish court was very important. Where I think in the English court, it was a bit more like everybody was just saying whatever was crossing their minds once in a while. Because you see Anne Boleyn having a very public fight with Sir Henry Guilford. Sir Henry Guilford going to Henry saying, hey, I'm leaving. Henry saying, why? Oh, because Anne Boleyn said that. And Henry's like, well, why are you listening to a woman? So this doesn't happen as much in the Spanish court, which is a shame. I would like a bit more tea and drama.
Yeah. Maybe it was because Henry VIII was a redhead. I mean, we're kind of fiery. Just saying. I'm just going to put that out
Well,
there.
they're saying, in that exhibition they did about Holbein and that sketch of Anne Boleyn, potential sketch of Anne Boleyn that now is identified as Anne Boleyn, at least from the inscription from the 18th century. Did you see that they said they think her hair might have been more red than previously thought, not as dark?
Oh, I did not see that.
Yeah, because we don't really know what Anne Boleyn's hair looked like. She's always been described as having what? She was described as having black eyes, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
is there any mention to her hair? I don't think so. This is the
I
problem with Anne Boleyn. We have a very clear image of in our heads of her. Is it true? Is it truthful? Maybe not.
Right. It's always about what sources said these things and then identifying their motive behind saying those things.
And then the things that we do have, we have to think, for example, those Holbein sketches, even though they look so lifelike and the verisimilitude seems so likely, also there's things involved like the chemical thing, the chemical reactions that happens in the pigments that they were using. And, some things fade over time. So eye color, hair color, sometimes change in paintings over time. The problem with Anne Boleyn is we only really have that portrait medal that we know is her because there's an inscription. But listen to this. This medal was apparently okay when it entered the British Museum. At some point, somebody smashed this medal. And her nose is now smashed. So even though it's her only likeness, it's not really... And a medal doesn't have the same detail as other kinds of forms. So really, we don't really know what Anne Boleyn looks like unless we're looking for little details in Holbein sketches like the word Anna or something like that. But, not everybody thinks that's what it's written there.
Okay, so wait, I need to go back to what you just said and ask some questions here because you said the medal was fine when it entered the British Museum.
I knew you were going to pick on that.
Yeah. So when was that? Do you know what year that was that it entered the museum?
Not at the top of my head. I know it's an early piece, but what I do know is that it was reproduced at some point when it was there and it didn't have the damage on it. And that's why we know. Because obviously the person who smashed it didn't leave a note saying, hey, it was me.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks, or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Visit USAA.com/bundle.
Bundle savings are off total premium, not available in all states or in all situations. To qualify, auto policy must be active prior to property policy issue, subject to change. Restrictions apply. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Summer's here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Like some graffiti behind. I was here.
Signed with a K. Can you imagine that? No.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've never heard that before. So that's an interesting little piece of knowledge.
And sometimes these metals get damaged by use, by friction. Sometimes they are, because they are preserving cases, sometimes from like opening the case, some of them can have some damage because they're, it depends on the material. They're harder or, stronger materials or not, or whatnot. But this seems to be someone smashing it with a tool, like boom, Anne Boleyn.
Defacing Anne Boleyn, just like all of her paintings.
But not too much because, it's still like a likeness and what you can draw. And you can draw lots of art historians. We use different methods to study these images. And one of the things that we study, it's pretty basic, but if you think about it, it's very efficient, is the model. So how is the image constructed? Metals are very similar to portrait miniatures. And then if you analyze the portrait miniatures of the time, they're very similar models. So the person is this is rendered in a very similar way, very similar clothes, in a similar position. These portrait miniature portraits of the Hornboots are rendered in England have inscriptions like the portrait medals. They're similar. They're used for the same. These are propaganda tools. So a medal might be, and this medal of Anne Boleyn was made to commemorate her coronation. But we know there's a Holbein sketch for a fountain that was made for her coronation. And I'm sure there was portraits of her, miniature portraits painted at the time too, to give to people. Medals might have been for foreign rulers, and miniature portraits usually for the women in court, because we know that Maud Parr, Catherine Parr's mother, gives to Catherine Parr miniature pictures of Henry and Catherine when she dies in 1529.
That's so
And
crazy.
in later portraits, and especially in the Spanish monarchy, you see these women displaying these miniature portraits in portraits, portraits within portraits. I think I'm becoming a bit obsessed with portraits.
Becoming? I think you were already obsessed. We don't even.
Maybe I'm just realizing it. Oh no!
Ladies and
You should
gentlemen.
have told me, Rebecca. You just let me blab on about portraits all day long, and you're like, somebody should tell her.
This is our biggest revelation today about Dr. Emma.
Oh no. It's a good thing that I'm doing an exhibition on portrait medals.
Yes, and get it out of your system, right? No, this is what you're good at. This is why you're passionate about it. And that's why I love talking to you about these things, because this is your passion.
It is my passion. And I've learned so much doing this exhibition, selecting and thinking. You know, when you are going to do an exhibition, you have to think, what is the message you want to convey with this, right? And portraiture is very linked to women, to marriages, and to a side of power called typically soft power. I'm not a huge fan of that because I think it's power that women had in this time, and how, especially with the development of Renaissance and humanism, in the elites, okay? We're not talking about peasant women like you and I, Rebecca. We're talking about the queens. There's a new mindset that women can contribute to society. So that's why they start appearing in these portrait medals. And I'm afraid to say, sorry, Henry, I know this episode was about you and is about you, but the Tudors dynasty is known for its women.
Yeah. Yes.
Especially Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, and Henry VIII's daughter. But making a comeback, Mary Tudor is, the first queen regnant. You have to be a strong, independent woman to be able to say, no, I am the daughter of Henry VIII, and I will be queen, and I am going to lead an army to London. And if you stand in my way, you'll see what happens.
Yeah.
You know? And becoming queen.
And she did.
And she did. All in her father's name. I love how she uses, Henry used the title of Defender of the Faith when he also proclaims himself as head of the Church of England, right?
Yeah.
Mary uses the same title as a Catholic monarch. Because really, she's like, well, I'm defending the true faith, right?
Yeah.
So she's a lot like her father, too. Maybe we could do an episode about how much Henry influences really Elizabeth and Mary, too. We always talk about Anne Boleyn and Catherine of Aragon, but Henry is also a powerhouse. We can't deny it. Who doesn't like the guy who tries to knock down Francis I, grows a beard because he wants to be flashier, who brings really the Renaissance. If Henry wouldn't wanted to have a Renaissance court, Catherine couldn't have done anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think now is a perfect opportunity to talk about how after Anne Boleyn and her influence on Henry VIII, it seems like his subsequent wives had less influence on him.
Yeah. I think they had much less time. I think we're comparing pears and, squirrels here. Because poor Catherine Howard was just a little girl.
Yeah.
I don't even like to talk about her too much. It just makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. I think Catherine Parr Henry probably wanted to go back to something very similar to Catherine of Aragon, even though she's reformed and everything, but she's a humanist.
Yeah.
She's a tame person who enjoys more scholarly work and those kind of things than, being the center of attention like Anne Boleyn or Dr. Emma, because we're not judging anyone here. And Jane Seymour, that poor woman, she she marries him just, I mean, she must have been so scared. And then she gets pregnant, and
Yeah.
then that poor woman.
Well, Jane is not as well educated as Anne Boleyn either. It's such a contrast between the two women for him to go from Anne Boleyn to Jane Seymour, who everyone compares to Elizabeth of York. Oh, she was the wife who reminded him of his mother.
I mean, people look a lot into these things. I think Henry was just like, I need this boy, I need this boy, I need this boy. Anne is not gonna give this boy to me. And who is the next one I have around that looks like could have a boy?
Yeah. Well, and the Seymours, I mean, Jane Seymour's mother, Marjorie, had 10 children, and the first four, I
Yeah.
believe, were boys.
And maybe, don't you think that Henry, when he looked for Jane, could have looked more for someone like Elizabeth Blount, who he had a boy with? Maybe
Yes.
she was the one that he was like, someone that looks like her. So, and Henry was very, I mean, it didn't, he's not rational. He doesn't apply like scientific things to like what he's doing. He believes in astrology. He believe maybe one of his advisors was like, the moon is blah, blah, so this is the woman you are going to have a boy with. And that was happened to be Jane Seymour. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Definitely Jane Seymour modeled herself after Catherine of Aragon too. So when I'm saying that Anne Boleyn copies Catherine of Aragon and Jane Seymour copies Catherine of Aragon, there's a pattern there for a reason, right? It's
Yeah.
because they're copying what's successful. Like we said, that Catherine was copying Elizabeth of York and Margaret Beaufort. I'm afraid that nobody's copying Anne Boleyn.
No, well, why would you after that kind of downfall?
Yeah, poor woman. I see why her daughter brings back her memory. I mean, you can't dissociate yourself from the person who gave birth to you.
Right.
And you have to vindicate your mother if you are rightful queen, you know? And that's the way to do it. But I think that, there's been much speculation lately that Anne Boleyn was a great influence in Elizabeth. I think Henry was the biggest influence in both his daughters, because that's what they had to think like. My dad was the king, now I'm the queen. And that's the way their mothers were. I think in Catherine's case, much more important than to Mary, because she raised her and she educated her. But Anne Boleyn didn't have that chance to educate her daughter. So for her, for Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn must have been a distant memory, but not her father, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Who had
that,
been there all her life until he died.
yeah, the steady influence, whether or not they were at court or not, he was still the King of England and they still knew what he was doing and
And the
where the
biggest
country.
influence, yeah, and the biggest influence on Anne Boleyn was probably on Elizabeth I was probably her stepmother,
Yeah. Catherine
Catherine
Parr.
Parr, because those are the crucial years. And her sister Mary. Other thing, I mean, Dr. M is in all types of projects. The other project that is very exciting that I'm involved in now is the publication of a book on the artistic patronage of Mary the First of England. And one of the things that's come from the very good contributions from very good specialists is that Mary and Elizabeth's relationship needs to be addressed more profoundly, because Mary influenced Elizabeth a lot. The fact that she had to disengage from that when she was queen after doesn't mean that she did not appreciate what Mary had done for her and saw her as a role model for her queenship, because she copies her images. She copies, we tend to think of them as confronted, and they have more in common that we know of, that we've known of. And, I think this will be the biggest change in the study of women in Henry VIII's court in the future is to first of all, not everyone was great, and they were all great and happy flower, and they were no, let's not confront. Yeah, they had conflicts. Women have conflicts, like the men.
Yes.
But also like these, if you confront two people, you don't see what they have in common. They do have things in common, especially if they're sisters and being raised together. Mary's gifting things to Elizabeth. She brings it back to court after the Wyatt rebellion and all that, and all these things. That is Elizabeth involved? Not, she was involved. She knew. She didn't say anything. She was involved. That's involving yourself. When she comes back to court, Mary treats her as an heir. And when she's dying, she leaves her the crown. So I think the women in the Tudor dynasty are the key to its success for 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, the influence. I think today our discussion and how these women influenced Henry VIII has really,
We love to hate.
we do love to hate the tool.
Would you like, I would go to a party hosted by Henry VIII, I must say. In the first years of Henry and Catherine's reign, they had the wildest, most fun parties. They introduced the carnival. They introduced that he would dress up as Robin Hood and go into a room and surprise her.
Yeah.
And they would just have so much fun. Imagine that, right?
Right. It seems like such a stark contrast to the end of his reign, doesn't it?
Does it though? Because I think by the end of his reign, he's so sick. Nobody wants to have fun when they're all sick and can't move.
That's why he's just in pain and angry and taking it out on everybody around him.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to feel I feel a bit sorry about that because I think he was a victim of himself. And that has to weigh on you, having killed two of your wives,
Yeah.
having killed Thomas More and all these people. And, for all they say, Bloody Mary, Bloody Henry.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think that must have weighed on him too, because he had a lot of time because he couldn't move, right? That also his psychological state. It must have been awful.
Well, we know too that it wasn't just the women who influenced Henry VIII, but I think there's something about women and how I don't even know how to say this without sounding.
He was a ladies' man.
I mean, there's a certain how do I say this? There's a certain ability that women have to get what they want. And I think
What? I've never heard of that.
I think that happened with his grandmother and his mother, not in a sexual way, obviously, with those guys or with his sisters, but I think especially with like Anne Boleyn, using sexuality as a way to get what you want. Maybe Catherine of Aragon did it too.
Oh, I'm sure she did. Imagine when he was 17 and she was 23 and Henry VII dies and they can finally be together. Imagine two people that liked each other. We know this. He stated it. He would have chosen her to Fernando, to her father. He sends a letter saying, I would have chosen her above everyone else. You know why, too? It's not just about looks. Catherine was attractive when she was just very short in this, but very pretty. It was how magnetic she was. Imagine this woman just speaking in Latin to the ambassadors, asking to see these paintings and being like, nah, Mitchell Sita would do a much better job. Let's translate this Chronicle of England into Spanish and let's finish with our coronation. And him knowing all these things, just getting excited for this encounter between them, right?
Yeah.
A 17-year-old boy, man, whatever you want to call it, because at this point, it's a transitional time too. He's becoming a man. And you all know how that goes, teenage years, and to have that attractive woman who's also a powerhouse presence in the court, he must have been he was allured by her and she was by him. She definitely was. And the last thing that Catherine of Aragon, I think she was in love with him until she died. Just because the way she thought of things, she was. Because the last thing she says to him, well, the very last thing she says to him is she signs as the queen. Which,
I love that.
Okay, slaying. I'm going with a slay. But in that letter, she mentions the last thing that my eyes desire is to see you again.
Yeah. And
I don't know if that was a way to say I still love you or a way to torture him forever, really, if you think about it. I think it was a bit of both, and I think it was a way to protect Mary. To just go being good, not being resentful. Kind of, but not. You know what I mean? Just keeping to what she had said that was the right thing. Because I think above all, she was very worried about three things, and it was the same thing, is the salvation of her soul, so her going to heaven, but Henry and her daughter too, because she was very worried. She was very worried Henry was going to go to hell because of what he was doing. That's what they believed. I'm not saying that Henry went to hell.
I don't think Catherine of Aragon only influenced Henry VIII. I think she also influenced all of Tudor court, right? Like, look, when Jane Seymour came into the picture, she clearly was influenced by Catherine of Aragon. She helped in bringing Mary and Elizabeth back to court. Would she have done all of that if it hadn't been for Catherine's actions?
And then we really have to realize that none of this would have happened without Isabel of Castile, who was the one to raise Catherine to have this personality and to give her these tools. But also Fernando, who I kind of like, always talk down about the guys, but Fernando had to enable Catherine to do all these things in order for her to be able to do them. Otherwise, she wouldn't have done them. If he wouldn't have said, okay, be an ambassadress, she wouldn't have been able to do it. So we have to give credit to the men. The men are opening their minds, but they're also getting kind of crazy when these women are like doing it really well, So they're like, we didn't give you power for this. You can't just take over. And the women are like, well, we're doing it quietly and efficiently. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So some of them and some of them not. They're human beings, just like the men. I think it's because they have all these constraints and shortcomings in their life. They have different strategies and they have to be persuasive. And I wanted to say to you, for all those people who are so focused on Catherine, being dismissed as an ugly wife at the end of her life or whatever, Henry VII wanted to marry her.
That's right.
So, yes. I mean, Henry VII and the Tudors just had a thing for the Spanish women, I guess.
Oh, well, I think that's where we have to end this episode, Dr. Emma.
Who doesn't have a thing for Spanish women, though?
I love it. Oh, this has been so fun talking about these women who influenced Henry VIII and looking at Henry VIII as well.
We should talk more about him. Yes, he's not that bad.
Yeah.
I like him.
He's all right. I mean, I have a poster of him behind me.
Tool, look at him. Hi, Henry. You know what? I think one of the reasons we should advocate more to talk about him in his early life. He was a cool dude for a long time.
Yeah.
And he's just, power does that to you. Power can corrupt you if you don't have the right tools. And not everybody is raised by Isabel of Castile.
That's right.
So, kudos to Henry for doing whatever he could to have a boy. Kudos to Anne Boleyn she was brave, and kudos to all of them because we love learning about them more and more, right?
We do. Yeah. Well, Dr. Emma, happy birthday to you. Yay! I'm so excited that you're my friend and that you are willing to navigate this crazy podcast world with me. And I'm just so happy that you're in my life. So if you're listening right now, please send Dr. Emma a happy birthday message today or whenever, because she deserves it. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron-exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.